Video games have been around for a long time, and in the early days they were usually short, usually being able to be beaten in a few minutes. So there is no need for a way to keep your progress when you turn the console off. But as games evolved, they got longer, more complex, and by the early 80s, password systems were made to retrieve your progress. You would get a code, write it down, and when you turn back on your PC, just re-enter the code and you'll be back to the point where you left off. This was a huge step, but still, it was inconvenient and tedious to input. But in the mid-80s, a new invention would change the world of gaming forever. In 1986, Nintendo created a game unlike the world had ever seen, The Legend of Zelda. While it was common for games before it to take place on a single screen, Zelda had dungeons, items, secrets, and overall was just a really long game for the time. Too long to beat in one sitting, so it became one of the first titles for Nintendo's new add-on for the Famicom, the Famicom Disk System. This attachment allowed the console to play games on floppy disks, which had rewritable memory, allowing for saving progress. To be fair, Nintendo wasn't the first to create games with a save feature. Lots of floppy disk titles on PCs had already done that, but they're the first to bring it to the home console market, which is still a huge accomplishment. Localizers ran into a problem though bringing the game into North America. The Famicom Disk System hadn't come out anywhere else except for Japan yet, and never would, so it would have to port it to a standard cartridge. The only problem would be there couldn't be saves like on a floppy. So, the localizers put their heads together and came up with a brilliant solution, a save battery. The progress would be outputted onto an SRAM chip inside the cartridge, and a CR2032 battery would power the SRAM to keep it from losing data. This was ingenious and opened many more roads for longer and more complex games. Final Fantasy, Mother, Kirby's Adventure, Dragon Quest, and a few sports games all followed suit. On the downside, installing a save battery in a cart was expensive, and these batteries eventually dry out and lose their data. But they do last a long time. In fact, some people have almost 35-year-old copies of Zelda that never went dry. But still, the vast majority of NES games didn't come with batteries, opting for password system instead. Sure, it's annoying and it takes up paper, but it's cheap. Moving into the 16-bit era, save batteries became a whole lot more common. Most first-party Super Nintendo games came with one. On the Genesis side of things, they weren't as common in earlier titles. Even Sonic 1 and 2 didn't have a save battery, but later games like Sonic 3 did. It was a similar deal with the Game Boy. The later the release date, the more nap breaks you get. When the 5th generation rolled around, SBs started to die out, both figuratively and literally. CD consoles like the PS1 and Sega Saturn saved games to memory cards, and also the Sega Saturn had a second save option. It had an internal battery inside of it. Now this mostly just had to deal with clocks, the in-game clocks and stuff, but it's still pretty neat, and some games you could save on it, but just like cartridge save batteries, they did dry out. While the Nintendo 64 did take carts, most installments switched over to a new double EP-ROM format that didn't require a battery. Kind of like a USB flash drive or SD card. We'll talk more about this next episode though. Regardless, Super Smash Bros., Ocarina of Time, Harvest Moon 64, and a few others maintained batteries. While SBs were pretty much dead on a home console front, they were alive and flourishing in the handheld world. Almost every late OG Game Boy and Game Boy Color game came with one. In fact, they were even expanding the capabilities of hardware. Pokemon Gold, Silver, and Crystal didn't just come with an ordinary battery, no, it came with a special one that tracks time even when the system's off, allowing for an in-game clock. So, assuming that you inputted the time correctly, play the game in the morning, it's morning. Play the game at night, in the game it's night. But this took a lot of power to do, so Pokemon Gold, Silver, and Crystal saves will die out faster than most other battery-backed games, around 5 or so years, maybe 10 if you're lucky. As the 6th generation came out from around the corner, it was the end of the road for SBs. The GBA was the only cartridge console of the era, and like the Nintendo 64 before it, its games saved to more reliable flash memory. But still, a few cards still came with an SB, and the last major game to come with one was Pokemon Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald. Well, it really isn't a save battery. All the game's data is saved to flash. It's used to run the internal clock in a game like Gold and Silver, only when it goes dry you don't lose your data, the clock just doesn't work anymore, which is really nice. And that's the end of the save battery saga. Very revolutionary and the first major step in real in-game saving. But do I miss them? Heck no! I hate how they dry up and lose everything. I'm really paranoid about losing my data in a lot of games, especially Earthbound. So while I respect them for being the first step to get us to where we are now, I'm glad they've been replaced with more reliable, sustainable methods. This has been Josh from Alpha Leaf Gaming. Stay tuned for part 2.